Welcome to Ask Jerry and Rebecca, part of Cold Wax Academy, a free video series where we answer your questions about cold wax medium. Welcome to this episode of Ask Jerry and Rebecca. Now, versions of this question have come to us from many people over the years, and we've answered it in some detail in our book, in our workshops at Cold Wax Academy. But Ree McLaughlin submitted this question with some specificity, and I thought maybe, given some of the new materials that are out there, we should tackle this question. And Ree's question specifically is, what are the essential differences between oil sticks versus oil paint and cold wax? Can you use only oil sticks for a complete mid-size painting? And if so, is there a downside? So it's a great question, Ree. Thank you for submitting it. I think many artists will benefit from us answering this question in a more comprehensive way. So included in this, I'm going to tackle oil pastels a little bit because that question, even though we've answered the oil pastel question many times, we have a specific Ask Jerry and Rebecca episode about it. I want to include this here because I think it will help clarify in people's minds some of the differences. I do want to answer two of your kind of multi-part questions, two parts of that. Can you use only oil sticks for a complete mid-size painting? Absolutely. You can use them for a small painting. You could use them for a painting the size of this whole studio wall behind me if you want to. It's not a problem. Is there a downside? I think there are a couple of possible downsides. I think the first downside is expense. Most of the oil sticks are quite expensive relative to oil paints as an individual medium and cold wax as an individual medium. Buying the prepared sticks is really, it's quite costly. And so the larger you go, the more of you're going to use and the more expensive the project becomes. Is there another downside? The only thing I would say is you're limited somewhat by the material. So the consistency, the color, the handling, if you're painting directly with the sticks, is just limited by that. You know, if you don't have any tools, you don't have any potential for mixing, things like that, if you're painting just directly with the sticks. So maybe that's a downside, or maybe it's not. You just accept that that's part of the process, just like, you know, drawing with charcoal has its limitations as well. All mediums have their limitations. So I don't know that that's a real downside, but it's a consideration. So this is pretty technical, so I'm going to reference my sheets here so that I don't forget anything. So pigment sticks, oil bars, oil pastels. Basically, that whole group are oil-based, pigment-heavy, pigment-dense sticks that you can draw or paint with. But there are some significant differences. And we can lump pigment sticks, oil sticks, and oil bars all into one category that is very distinct and very separate from oil pastels. So I'm going to call all of these that we just lumped together, pigment sticks, oil bars, I'm going to call them either pigment sticks or oil sticks, not by brand, but by medium. And if I'm talking about oil pastels, then I'm going to use that term very separately because it's a very distinct product. So let's start with oil pastels, which we generally don't recommend, and then we'll move on to the pigment sticks. Oil pastels, they're great. They're beautiful, they're buttery, they allow blending, and they have vibrancy, but they are pigment, wax, and a non-drying oil. And mineral oil is the most common. Now, what do I mean by a non-drying oil? Well, oil paints are usually linseed oil, walnut oil, or safflower oil. Those are the three most common, probably. Over time, those dry. They cure and harden. They form a thick, dense, tough layer that stands the test of time to touching, abrasion, all of that kind of stuff. Mineral oil never dries. It stays oily and soft forever. So oil pastels stay soft and oily forever. That's why pastel artists have to cover their work with glass or some other kind of protective surface so that it doesn't smear if it gets bumped or touched. Now, there are these new spray-on, mostly, drying agents or fixatives that really, really transform the use of oil pastels. You can make an oil pastel painting, spray these fixative on there, and they are really, really resistant to smearing when they're touched. I think that's great. But then people are saying, well, then just use those on top of, you know, the oil pastels in your cold wax painting. That makes me very, very nervous because now we're adding in yet another chemical on top of the layers of oil and wax that has the potential to create problems. Those fixatives are based in ethanol and vinyl resin. We don't have any experience combining ethanol and vinyl resins with cold wax and oils at this point. So it makes me concerned that they could delaminate, that the paint could come apart, that it could lead to cracking, all kinds of possibilities. Now, that may be worry for nothing, and maybe we can absolutely do it and it's not going to create any issues whatsoever. That would be great, but we just have to be honest that we don't know the answer. And since we have alternatives to oil pastels, we have pigment sticks, oil bars as alternatives to those, I think unless you're really deliberately experimenting with media and materials, why not choose something we know is going to work and not create any problems? So I'm going to leave it at that and move into oil sticks. So oil sticks are a combination of pigment, wax, and a drying oil. And usually it's one of those ones I said, linseed oil, safflower oil, or walnut oil. Now, the pigment sticks that we are talking about are generally more oil than wax, and the wax is really just enough to give the material enough body to form a stick. So I'm going to go through some of the different brands and what they're made of, and some of the things that we have noticed when we worked with them, and some of the things that people have reported as community artists that we've talked to, and then some of the things that the manufacturers have told us. So in R&F sticks, which are probably the most well-known, although they're certainly not necessarily the best, they're just probably the most well-known brand, they use beeswax. Sennelier's oil sticks, they use what they call mineral wax, which is usually something like paraffin or microcrystalline waxes, which come from petroleum or oil. So they're based in that. Now, Kama, we reached out to them, and they use bleached beeswax and carnauba waxes, a mixture of the two. They don't use any paraffin or microcrystalline waxes, and they also use cobalt and zirconium dryers in their sticks. Now, R&F does not use dryers in their sticks. They have a separate blending stick that has drying agent in it. But R&F sticks don't have any drying agents, so they're fairly slow drying because of that, and some of the colors are very slow drying. Now, in the Kama sticks, basically all of their colors have some level of drying agent. They say that they don't use resins of any kind. They use walnut oil and stand oil, and stand oil is just slightly polymerized linseed oil. It's been heated for a while, so it's thicker. So very basic, straightforward products. The drying time is always a question we get asked about, and it's just variable depending on the brand, the color, whether there's drying agents, how thick the layer is, how thin the layer is. So very, very similar to working with cold wax and oils. So we can't make a lot of specific comments about the brands. Another brand, not new, is Paul Desmarais, but it's new to us. We weren't aware of them for quite a while, but this year we talked with Paul Desmarais, who's the artist who makes these in his own studio. We got some samples and we really, really liked them. Now, these are handmade by him in his studio. They have a really nice consistency. They have a very different range of colors than R&F or the Kama sticks. He uses walnut oil, and he says he uses 2 natural waxes, but no beeswax, but he wasn't willing to share which specific waxes. in my mind, if they're natural, that means that they have to be something like paraffins or carnauba or something like that to be natural waxes, but that's what we know from him. Now, the last brand is Richeson's Shiva oil sticks, and they weren't willing to really share anything with us, which I think is unfortunate. I have to say I don't really know why. Everyone else shared a lot of information with us, and they said for proprietary reasons they weren't willing to, so whatever. But I do want to mention some things about them. It says in their product thing that they're easy cleanup with soap and water or baby wipes. I don't know what that means. Most of the oil products don't clean up so easily with soap and water, so I don't know what that means about their ingredients. The consistency is nice, although some of them can be a little bit firm for use with cold wax and oils, but they can be nice. They say that most colors dry within 24 hours and they're permanent when they dry. So again, I don't know what that means because most of their oil sticks don't dry in 24 hours, and so I don't know what that means about their ingredients or their pigments. They do say they're compatible with other oil paints and other mediums, so I think that's a positive. But then they also say that most colors are non-toxic. So, you know, what that means to me is if they have something that says cadmium red, but it's non-toxic, then there's no cadmium in that. If it's, whatever, chromium green, but it's non-toxic, then there's no chromium green in that. So these may just be hues rather than actual pigments. So you just have to be aware of that their transparency or opacity or their handling might be very, very different. Again, I don't know how to say much more because they were fairly tight-lipped about any information. So I'm extrapolating from what I could get from their website. So all of these products are essentially like working with oil paint and cold wax medium because they have pigments, some drying oil, and some kind of wax in there. Well, that's basically what we paint with every day when we go to our studio. So you don't need to treat these really any differently than working with cold wax and oil paints. They're essentially the same thing, just in different ratios and in a different form, a stick form. They can be used freely throughout the entire process of your painting, realizing that those that don't have a drying agent or certain colors or thicknesses may dry a lot more slowly than the rest of your oil paints and wax that are layered in or around them. But that doesn't mean you have to wait for them to dry to paint over them. Rebecca layers oil sticks, oil bars throughout her paintings over and over again, and she just puts them in and paints right on over them, and it doesn't create any problems. Now that wetness does impact how her surface handles. You just learn to work with that. They can be used as final line work on the surface of your painting. So if you want to draw a line like you might have wanted to do with an oil pastel, you can do that with an oil or pigment stick. It will dry and become an absolutely permanent, fixed part of your painting with no worries that it's going to come off, that it's going to smear, or anything like that. You can also use them to make glazes over the surface of your work. They're really, really beautiful and they're transparent glazes. And all of these will cure, so there's no chance of smudging or anything like that. And then, as I said to Ree's question, you can create a drawing or a painting using just oil sticks alone. They might be slower to dry than you might want, and there may be more expense than you might anticipate, but beyond that, they're absolutely beautiful for that technique. So, I hope that this answers most or all of your questions about working with oil sticks, oil bars, pigment sticks, and hopefully not oil pastels in your cold wax paintings. Thanks.